Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The encounter at the airport. Amara Johnson walked into the bustling international airport, pulling a sleek black suitcase behind her. She was dressed elegantly in a tailored navy blue blazer and matching trousers, her braided hair tied neatly into a bun. Her stride was confident, her head held high. She had done this countless times before, moving through airports, traveling to different countries for important meetings. But today was different, though she didn't know it yet. The airport was busy as always. Families, business travelers, and tourists shuffled in different directions, the sound of rolling suitcases and overlapping announcements filling the air. Amara made her way to the immigration counter, holding her passport and boarding pass. She smiled politely at the officer behind the counter as she handed over her documents. Officer James Carter glanced up at her briefly before taking the passport. He was a middle-aged man with a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce through everyone who approached his desk. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and his demeanor was stern. As he flipped through Amara's passport, his expression changed subtly. His brows furrowed slightly, and his lips tightened into a thin line. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone clipped. "Geneva," Amara replied with a calm smile. "I have a meeting to attend." "Business or personal?" he pressed, his eyes narrowing. "Business," she said. "It's related to my work." He glanced up at her again, this time with open skepticism. "What kind of work?" "International relations," she answered simply. She had no intention of divulging more than was necessary. But Officer Carter wasn't satisfied. He flipped through her passport again, studying the stamps from various countries. There were many, far more than the average traveler might have. Something about it seemed to bother him. "You've traveled a lot," he remarked, his tone almost accusatory. "Yes, my work requires it," Amara replied patiently. He paused, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Are you sure this passport is yours?" The question caught Amara off guard, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, it is," she said firmly. "You don't look like someone who travels for business," he said, his voice cold. The implication behind his words was clear. Amara's calm demeanor didn't falter. "And what does someone who travels for business look like?" she asked, her tone measured. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he picked up a pair of scissors from the desk. "This passport looks suspicious," he declared loudly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "I can't allow you to travel with it." Before Amara could respond, he brought the scissors down on her passport, slicing through the thick booklet with deliberate force. The crowd behind her gasped, and murmurs spread among the onlookers. Amara's heart sank as she watched the officer's actions, but outwardly, she remained calm. "You have made a big mistake," she said, her voice steady but firm. Her dark eyes locked onto his with a gaze that carried both authority and determination. Officer Carter smirked, clearly believing he had asserted his power. "We'll see about that," he said smugly. "Step aside while we verify your identity." Amara stepped to the side as instructed, her posture straight and her expression unreadable. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder, with some passengers questioning why the officer had acted so harshly. "Did you see what he just did?" one man whispered to his wife. "That's so unprofessional," another woman said. "She didn't even do anything wrong." Despite the tension in the air, Amara's mind remained focused. She knew who she was and what she stood for. This incident, though shocking, would not break her. If anything, it strengthened her resolve. As Officer Carter disappeared into a back room with the pieces of her passport, Amara pulled out her phone. She made a quick call, her voice calm and composed. "This is Amara Johnson. I need assistance at the airport immediately. My identification has been tampered with." She ended the call and looked around at the crowd. Some were staring at her with pity, others with curiosity. Amara didn't care. She wasn't here to prove herself to them. But soon enough, everyone would know exactly who she was. The officer returned, his expression smug as he approached her. "We'll need more information to verify your identity," he said. Amara met his gaze, without flinching. "You'll have it soon," she said, her voice steady. "But I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your actions." For a moment, Officer Carter hesitated. Something in her tone, a quiet confidence that couldn't be shaken, made him pause. But he quickly brushed it off, confident in his authority. Unbeknownst to him, the storm he had just unleashed was about to turn the entire airport upside down. The crowd's reaction. The airport was bustling as usual, with announcements echoing and travelers moving quickly to catch their flights. But near one of the immigration counters, a growing crowd was gathering. The air seemed heavier there, thick with tension and a sense of disbelief. At the center of it all stood a woman, calm and dignified despite the chaos. Her dark, smooth skin gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and her sharp, professional attire contrasted with the casual clothes of the officer facing her. She had handed over her passport only moments ago, yet now she stood holding its torn remains. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern face and a rigid posture, had just cut her passport in half. The sound of the scissors slicing through the document still lingered in the air. Around them, people were starting to murmur. "Did you see that?" whispered a man to his wife, who clutched her carry-on bag tightly. "Why would he do that?" "She doesn't look like a threat," the woman replied. Others were equally shocked. A group of college students paused their conversation and began recording the scene on their phones. "This is unbelievable," one of them muttered, angling their phone to get a clear shot. The woman, however, remained silent. She stood tall, her back straight and her chin slightly lifted. There was no anger in her eyes, no tears of frustration. Her calm demeanor seemed to unsettle the officer, who had expected her to lash out. "You people always try these tricks," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. He waved the shredded passport for all to see. "A fake passport with a fake UN stamp? Really? You think we're stupid?" Someone in the crowd gasped audibly. "She's from the UN?" a young woman asked no one in particular. The officer smirked. "She claims she's a UN ambassador," he announced loudly, as though mocking the very idea. "But we know better, don't we?" The woman still said nothing. Her silence seemed louder than any argument she could have made. A bystander, a middle-aged man with a briefcase, couldn't hold back. "Sir, I don't think you can just destroy someone's passport like that," he said, stepping forward cautiously. The officer turned on him instantly. "This is none of your business," he barked. "Security protocols are in place for a reason. If you want to complain, take it up with airport management." The man stepped back, but the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some people shook their heads in disapproval, others whispered to each other, their faces a mix of confusion and unease. The woman finally moved. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather wallet. With deliberate calmness, she opened it and retrieved a sleek ID card. The blue and white card gleamed under the light, and the bold letters "United Nations" were unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The murmurs turned into a buzz of excitement and shock. "Is that real?" someone asked. "Look at her picture." "It matches perfectly," said another. The officer's smug expression faltered, but only for a moment. He scoffed, trying to regain his authority. "Anyone can print a fake ID," he said dismissively. "This proves nothing." But the crowd wasn't convinced. A young woman wearing a backpack turned to the man next to her. "She doesn't look like someone who would fake anything," she said. "She's so calm. If it were me, I'd be yelling by now." "She's handling this like a pro," the man agreed. "Maybe she really is who she says she is." The officer crossed his arms, clearly frustrated by the growing doubt around him. "Everyone, step back," he commanded. "This is a security issue. Stay out of it." But the people didn't move. If anything, they stepped closer, their curiosity overpowering their fear of authority. Phones were still recording, and the faint sound of clicks and camera shutters filled the air. The woman, still holding her UNID card, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm, each word carrying weight. "Sir," she said, her tone unshaken, "you have destroyed a valid passport. That is a serious offense under international law. You've also made baseless accusations without verifying the facts. I suggest you call your supervisor immediately." The crowd fell silent. The officer opened his mouth to retort but hesitated. He hadn't expected her to speak with such authority. For a moment, he looked unsure of what to do. Before he could respond, a voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" A tall man in a suit, the airport manager, had arrived. He looked between the officer, the woman, and the crowd, his brows furrowed in concern. "Why is everyone gathered here? This is a security checkpoint, not a spectacle." The officer straightened up, relief flashing across his face. "Sir, this woman presented a fraudulent passport and fake UN credentials," he said quickly. "I confiscated the document and took appropriate action." The manager frowned, his gaze shifting to the woman. She met his eyes calmly and extended her UNID card. "My passport was valid," she said simply. "This is my identification. You may verify it with the United Nations." The manager took the card hesitantly and examined it closely. The murmurs in the crowd resumed, louder this time. "She's telling the truth," someone said. "Imagine being in her shoes," added another. "She's so composed. I'd have lost it by now." As the manager studied the ID, his expression changed. His brows shot up, and his mouth opened slightly in shock. He looked at the woman, then back at the officer. You cut her passport?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. The officer stammered. I thought it was fake, sir. It looked suspicious, and..." The manager didn't let him finish. "Do you know who she is?" he asked, his voice rising. He turned to the woman and bowed his head slightly. "Ma'am, I deeply apologize for this unacceptable behavior. Please allow me to make amends." The crowd erupted into whispers. "Who is she?" someone asked, craning their neck to see better. The woman's face remained serene, but her eyes held a glimmer of something, perhaps relief, perhaps quiet satisfaction. She didn't answer the manager's question. Instead, she stepped aside, letting the situation unfold as the crowd watched, spellbound. A sudden turn of events. The tension in the air grew heavier as the airport manager held the woman's UNID card in his hands. His face, once stern and commanding, was now pale with recognition. His eyes darted from the card to the woman and then back to the crowd that had gathered. The officer, still holding the remains of the woman's passport, shifted uncomfortably. His earlier arrogance had faded, replaced by a creeping unease. He cleared his throat, attempting to salvage his position. "Sir, I was only following protocol. This woman presented a suspicious document. I acted in the interest of airport security." The manager's gaze snapped to the officer, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Protocol?" he repeated, his voice sharp. "Protocol does not include destroying a valid passport without proper verification. Protocol does not include humiliating a passenger in front of hundreds of witnesses." He waved the ID card in the air. "Do you even realize who she is?" The crowd, now fully invested in the unfolding drama, leaned in closer. Whispers rippled through the sea of faces. "Who is she?" someone asked. "She must be someone really important." The officer opened his mouth to respond but hesitated, his confidence completely eroded. He looked at the woman, who stood as poised as ever, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his growing panic. The manager turned back to the woman and bowed slightly, his gesture both apologetic and respectful. "Madam Ambassador," he said, his voice steady but reverent, "please allow me to formally apologize on behalf of the airport staff. This incident is unacceptable, and we will address it immediately." The crowd gasped, collectively. The word ambassador echoed through the space, sending shockwaves of realization through the onlookers. Phones were raised higher, recording every second. Some people exchanged incredulous looks, while others muttered in disbelief. "She's a UN ambassador?" a young man exclaimed. "This is insane," his friend replied. "Imagine treating someone like her this way." The officer took an involuntary step back. His hands trembled slightly, and his face flushed a deep red. "AAM, ambassador?" he stuttered. "Sir, I didn't know." "She didn't say anything." "She didn't have to," the manager snapped. "Her identification was right here, and you failed to do your job properly. Instead, you chose to destroy her passport and humiliate her in public. Do you realize the gravity of what you've done?" The officer tried to respond but was cut off by the manager, who turned back to the woman. "Madam Ambassador," he said again, his tone apologetic, "I cannot express how deeply sorry I am. Please, let us escort you to a private lounge while we resolve this matter. I assure you, steps will be taken immediately." The woman finally spoke, her voice calm but commanding. "There's no need for a private lounge," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "What has happened here should not be hidden. It's a lesson, for everyone." Her words hung in the air, resonating with the crowd. People nodded in agreement, their respect for her growing with every passing second. A young girl, no older than 10, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, is she really an ambassador?" she whispered. "Yes, honey," her mother replied, her voice filled with awe. "And she's handling this with so much grace. We could all learn from her." The woman turned to the officer, her gaze steady and unflinching. "You judged me without facts," she said, her voice soft but piercing. "You assumed my credentials were fake because of how I look. You destroyed my property without a second thought. Tell me, officer, what did you hope to achieve?" The officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. The manager, sensing the weight of the moment, stepped forward. "Madam, I assure you that this behavior does not reflect our standards. The officer will face immediate disciplinary action, and we will ensure that your passport is replaced without delay." The woman held up a hand, silencing him. "It's not just about me," she said. "This is about everyone who has ever been judged unfairly. About every woman, every person of color, every individual who has been treated as less than they are. This incident is just a symptom of a much larger problem." The crowd erupted into applause. Her words had struck a chord, resonating deeply with everyone who had witnessed the scene. The manager nodded, his expression serious. "You're absolutely right," he said. "And we will ensure that this airport learns from this mistake. You have my word." The woman looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "I will hold you to that," she said simply. The officer, now visibly trembling, tried to speak. "Ma'am, I didn't mean to." "I wasn't," he trailed off, his voice breaking. The woman regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, she said, "I don't need your apology. What I need is for you to reflect on your actions and learn from this experience. Treat the next person you meet with the respect they deserve, regardless of who they are or where they come from." The officer looked like he might cry. He nodded stiffly, unable to say anything. The manager gestured to a staff member nearby. "Please escort Madam Ambassador to the VIP lounge," he said. But the woman shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "I'll wait here, just like everyone else. I'm not above anyone." The crowd erupted into applause again, louder this time. Her humility and grace had won over every heart in the room. As the manager scrambled to ensure her flight arrangements were restored, the woman stood among the people, her presence a quiet but powerful reminder of resilience and dignity. The story of the airport incident would soon spread, going viral within hours. The footage recorded by bystanders would be shared across social media, sparking debates about prejudice, equality, and justice. But for those who had been there that day, the lesson was clear: respect and dignity should never be withheld based on assumptions. And as the woman finally boarded her flight, she carried with her not just the title of ambassador, but the admiration of everyone who had witnessed her remarkable grace under fire. The officer's regret. The atmosphere at the airport had shifted dramatically. What began as a confrontation fueled by bias and arrogance had transformed into a powerful moment of reflection for everyone involved. Yet for the officer, the weight of his actions was just beginning to settle in. He stood frozen at the immigration desk, his hands trembling slightly as the remnants of the woman's passport lay on the counter in front of him. The crowd, now buzzing with chatter and murmurs, only heightened his discomfort. He could feel their eyes on him, judgmental, disapproving, questioning. The uniform he had always worn with pride suddenly felt heavy, as if it no longer belonged to him. The officer replayed the scene in his mind, each detail sharpening the sting of his regret. He remembered the calm confidence with which the woman had handed over her passport, her polite demeanor, and the respectful way she addressed him, despite his growing hostility. He had dismissed all of it. Instead, he had let his assumptions and unchecked prejudice guide his actions. She had said nothing when he cut her passport in half, yet her silence had spoken volumes. Now, her words echoed in his head, "You judged me without facts. You destroyed my property without a second thought. Tell me, officer, what did you hope to achieve?" The officer swallowed hard, his mouth dry. What had he hoped to achieve? What had driven him to act so rashly? He didn't have an answer, and the realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. Meanwhile, the airport manager continued to address the crowd, assuring them that the situation was being handled. The woman, now revealed as a United Nations ambassador, remained composed, her presence commanding respect. She chose not to retreat to the VIP lounge, opting instead to wait with the other passengers, further endearing herself to the onlookers. The officer's shame deepened as he watched her. Despite everything, she had not raised her voice, not insulted him, not retaliated in any way. She had let his actions speak for themselves, and in doing so, she had exposed his ignorance and lack of professionalism for all to see. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Excuse me, officer?" It was a young man from the crowd, holding a phone in his hand. "Do you have anything to say about what just happened? People are recording this, you know." The officer's throat tightened. He glanced at the phone, its camera lens glaring at him like an unblinking eye. He stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Another voice chimed in, this time from an older woman. "What you did was disgraceful," she said firmly. "How could you treat someone like that? You didn't even bother to check the facts." The officer's face burned with humiliation. He wanted to explain himself, to defend his actions, but he knew there was no justification. Every word he might say would sound hollow, even to his own ears. As the murmurs in the crowd grew louder, the woman stepped forward, her calm presence silencing the noise. She raised a hand, and the onlookers fell quiet, waiting to hear what she would say. "I appreciate your support," she began, her voice steady and measured, "but let us not turn this into a spectacle. This incident is not just about one officer or one mistake. It's about a mindset that affects countless people every day. If we focus solely on blaming individuals, we miss the opportunity to address the larger issue." Her words carried a weight that silenced even the harshest critics in the crowd. People exchanged glances, nodding in agreement. The officer, however, felt as though she were speaking directly to him. Her message was clear, this was about more than just him, but he had played a role in perpetuating the problem. The manager stepped forward. "Madam Ambassador," he said, "I assure you that this officer will face the consequences of his actions. We take this matter very seriously." The woman turned to the officer, her gaze steady, but not unkind. "What happens next is not for me to decide," she said. "But I hope you take this experience as an opportunity to learn. Reflect on your actions, not just today, but every day moving forward. Ask yourself why you made the assumptions you did and how you can do better." Her words struck the officer like a blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. He nodded stiffly, unable to meet her eyes. I'm sorry," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. The woman regarded him for a moment before responding. "Regret is a start," she said. "But actions speak louder than words. Let your future behavior show that you've learned from this." The officer's regret deepened as the woman returned to her seat among the other passengers. He watched as people approached her, offering words of support and admiration. Some asked for selfies, others simply thanked her for her grace and composure. She accepted their gestures with humility, her smile warm but reserved. The officer, meanwhile, felt increasingly isolated. His colleagues avoided meeting his gaze, and the whispers in the crowd seemed louder than ever. For the first time in his career, he questioned his suitability for the job he had once loved. How could he protect and serve others if his biases clouded his judgment? The airport manager called for a brief meeting with the officer in a private office. There, he delivered a stern reprimand. "What you did today was unacceptable," he said. "You've not only embarrassed this airport but also jeopardized its reputation. The world is watching, and we cannot afford mistakes like this." The officer nodded, his head bowed. "I understand, sir," he said quietly. "I'll accept whatever disciplinary action is necessary." The manager sighed, his tone softening slightly. "I believe in accountability," he said, "but I also believe in second chances. Take this as an opportunity to grow. Undergo the diversity and sensitivity training we provide. Learn from this mistake. And above all, never let this happen again." The officer left the office with a heavy heart, determined to do better but unsure if he could ever repair the damage he had done. By the time the woman's flight was ready for boarding, the incident had already begun to spread online. Videos of the confrontation had gone viral, sparking debates about prejudice, authority, and the importance of accountability. Some called for the officer's resignation, while others praised the woman's grace under pressure. As the ambassador boarded her flight, she left behind not just a powerful lesson but also a legacy of resilience and dignity. For the officer, the incident became a turning point, a painful but necessary reminder of the importance of fairness, respect, and humility. And for the crowd that had witnessed it all, the day served as a wake-up call, a reminder that everyone, regardless of their title, background, or appearance, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The apology and consequences. The departure lounge was quieter now. The crowd that had witnessed the dramatic incident had dispersed, but the energy of what had transpired lingered. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing their thoughts on what they had seen, some still scrolling through their phones to watch the footage they had recorded. The video of the incident was already making waves online, and discussions about prejudice and justice were spreading rapidly. For the officer, however, the weight of his actions felt unbearable. His manager's reprimand echoed in his mind, but it was the woman's words that had truly unsettled him. "Let your future behavior show that you've learned from this." They were not words of anger or condemnation, but of expectation. She had offered him a path forward, one that demanded accountability and change, and it left him feeling both grateful and ashamed. The officer stood in a small office near the immigration desk, his hands fidgeting nervously. His supervisor had called him there to discuss the next steps. He had been stripped of his station for the day, and his actions were now under formal review. "You put us all in a difficult position," the supervisor said, his tone sharp but measured. "The ambassador has shown remarkable restraint, but the truth is, this situation could have gone much worse, for you, for the airport, for everyone." The officer nodded silently. He wanted to argue, to explain that he had acted on instinct, but he knew it would be futile. His actions had no defense. Effective immediately, the supervisor continued, "You're being placed on administrative leave. During this time, you'll be required to undergo intensive sensitivity training. Depending on the findings of the review board, additional actions may follow. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," the officer replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt a pang of relief. He hadn't lost his job yet, but it was overshadowed by the shame of knowing how close he had come to ruining not just his own reputation, but that of the airport. In the VIP lounge, the airport manager sat across from the ambassador, his demeanor apologetic but professional. Madam Ambassador, he began, I cannot apologize enough for what you've endured here today. This incident has highlighted serious gaps in our training and oversight, and I assure you that we are taking immediate steps to address them. The woman sipped her tea calmly, her expression unreadable. She had been offered the best accommodations, expedited travel arrangements, and a formal letter of apology from the airport, but none of it seemed to matter to her. I appreciate your efforts, she said finally, her voice steady but firm. But apologies and promises are not enough. Change must be tangible, not just for me, but for everyone who walks through this airport. This isn't the first time someone has been treated unfairly, and it won't be the last unless systemic changes are made. The manager nodded earnestly. You're absolutely right, he said. We've already scheduled mandatory training sessions for all staff, starting next week. We're also reviewing our protocols to ensure that incidents like this cannot happen again. The woman studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good, she said. But remember, this isn't just about training. It's about fostering a culture of respect, empathy, and accountability. That's something no training manual can teach. Her words left the manager thoughtful. He realized that she wasn't just speaking as someone wronged, but as a leader advocating for meaningful change. Meanwhile, the officer sat alone in the staff break room, his thoughts racing. He had received a notification on his phone about a staff-wide email addressing the incident. It was clear that the airport was taking the matter seriously, and he was at the center of it all. Unable to shake the guilt, he decided to take a bold step. He stood up, adjusted his uniform, and walked toward the VIP lounge. He knew he had no authority to be there and that he might even face further reprimand for approaching the ambassador directly, but he felt compelled to speak to her. When he arrived, he found the ambassador seated by the window, gazing out at the runway. The airport manager, noticing the officer's approach, frowned but did not intervene. Perhaps he, too, recognized the importance of what was about to happen. The officer took a deep breath and stepped forward. Madam Ambassador, he said quietly. She turned to face him, her expression calm but guarded. Yes, she said, her tone neutral. He hesitated, struggling to find the right words. I came to apologize. Not because I was told to, but because I need to. What I did to you was wrong, completely wrong. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I failed to treat you with the respect you deserve. For that, I am deeply sorry. The room fell silent. Even the airport manager seemed to hold his breath, waiting for her response. The ambassador regarded the officer for a long moment. Then she said, Do you understand why what you did was wrong? Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice trembling. It wasn't just about the passport. It was about my assumptions, about you, about people who don't look like me. I didn't just fail you, I failed everyone watching. I'm truly sorry. Her gaze softened slightly. Regret is important, she said, echoing her earlier words. But what matters is what you do next. Words are not enough, officer. I know, he said quickly. I'm committed to changing. I'll go through the training, I'll reflect on my actions, and I'll make sure this never happens again. I promise. She nodded slowly, then extended her hand. The officer hesitated for a moment, then shook it, feeling a sense of both relief and responsibility. This isn't just about you or me, she said. It's about the example we set for others. Remember that. I will, he said, his voice steady now. Thank you for giving me this chance. As the ambassador boarded her flight, the officer watched from afar, his heart heavy but determined. The day had changed his life, forcing him to confront his biases and reevaluate his purpose. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to walk it. The ambassador's story, meanwhile, continued to spread, sparking conversations about justice, equality, and the power of grace. Her words and actions resonated far beyond the airport, reminding the world that respect and dignity are rights, not privileges. A life-changing moment for everyone. As the ambassador's flight soared into the sky, the airport slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Passengers hurried to catch their planes, announcements blared over the intercom, and the tension from earlier began to dissipate. Yet for those who had witnessed the incident firsthand, the experience remained vivid, a moment that had left an indelible mark on everyone involved. The officer, still reeling from his apology, returned to his station, though he wasn't permitted to resume his duties. He had been instructed to remain in the back office until the review process concluded. Sitting alone, he scrolled through his phone, coming across videos of the incident that were now trending on social media. The captions varied but carried the same essence: UN ambassador humiliated at airport, Grace under fire, ambassador teaches a lesson in dignity, and prejudice exposed in real time. The comments below the videos were brutal. Some called for his immediate dismissal, while others praised the ambassador's poise and composure. A few struck a nerve. "This is why systemic change is so important," one commenter wrote. "It's not just about this officer, it's about the mindset behind his actions." The officer sighed, setting his phone aside. The realization that he had become a symbol of a much larger issue weighed heavily on him. But amid the regret, he also felt a spark of determination. If he had been part of the problem, he wanted to be part of the solution. In the days that followed, the airport administration took swift action. Diversity and sensitivity training sessions were scheduled for all staff, starting with the officer who had been at the center of the incident. The training was rigorous, involving not just lectures but interactive sessions, role-playing, and discussions about unconscious bias and cultural awareness. The officer, initially defensive, found himself deeply moved by the stories and perspectives shared during these sessions. One particular moment stayed with him. A woman of color shared her experience of being racially profiled at airports, her voice trembling as she recounted the humiliation and fear she had felt. For the first time, the officer truly understood the impact of his actions. He realized that what he had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal of the trust people placed in him as an authority figure. By the end of the training, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, vowing to approach his job with greater empathy and awareness. Meanwhile, the ambassador's story continued to gain traction online. News outlets picked up the videos, and interviews with eyewitnesses painted a vivid picture of the incident. Social media was abuzz with discussions about prejudice, power dynamics, and the importance of representation. The ambassador herself, however, remained remarkably private. She issued a brief statement, emphasizing the need for systemic change and urging the public to focus on solutions rather than individual blame. Her words were measured and powerful. "This incident is not about me or the officer involved. It is about the countless people who face discrimination and prejudice every day, often without witnesses or recourse. Let this moment serve as a reminder that dignity and respect are not privileges, they are rights. Change begins when we confront our biases, hold ourselves accountable, and strive to do better." Her statement was widely shared, sparking campaigns and initiatives aimed at promoting equality and justice. Organizations around the world used the incident as a case study, highlighting the importance of cultural competence and fair treatment. At the airport, the changes were palpable. Staff members who had once gone about their routines without much thought now approached their work with greater care and consideration. The officer, reinstated after completing his training, became a vocal advocate for fairness and empathy. He often shared his own experience, using it as a cautionary tale to encourage others to reflect on their biases. One day, months after the incident, he received a letter from the ambassador. It was brief but impactful. "I've seen the steps you've taken to learn and grow, and I commend your efforts. Remember, change is not a destination, it is a journey. Keep walking the path of understanding and respect, and you will make a difference. Ambassador." The officer read the letter several times, his eyes misting with gratitude. Her words, forgiving yet firm, reinforced his commitment to being better, not just as an officer, but as a person. For the passengers who had been at the airport that day, the incident left a lasting impression. Many spoke about how it had opened their eyes to the subtle ways prejudice could manifest and the importance of standing up for what was right. Some even reached out to the airport administration with letters of support for the ambassador and suggestions for improvement. Among them was a young girl who had witnessed the confrontation with her mother. Inspired by the ambassador's grace and strength, she wrote a school essay titled "What I Learned from a Real-Life Hero." In her essay, she described how the ambassador's calm response had taught her that power doesn't come from shouting or fighting, it comes from standing firm in your truth. The essay won a local competition, and when the ambassador heard about it, she arranged to meet the girl during her next visit to the city. The meeting was brief but heartfelt, and the ambassador encouraged the girl to continue using her voice to make a difference. As the ambassador traveled the world, representing the United Nations and advocating for human rights, she carried the memory of that day with her, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the work that still needed to be done. She often reflected on the officer's apology, the crowd's support, and the collective power of people standing together against injustice. Her story became more than just a viral moment, it became a catalyst for change. It reminded people that dignity and respect are not optional, that assumptions and biases can cause real harm, and that even in the face of adversity, grace and composure can inspire transformation. For the officer, the incident marked the beginning of a lifelong journey of learning and growth. He became a better listener, a more compassionate person, and a mentor to new recruits, ensuring that they understood the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their background or appearance. And for the world, the incident served as a stark reminder of the work still needed to build a fairer, more equitable society. The ambassador's message echoed far and wide: change begins with each of us, and it starts today. In the end, the moment at the airport wasn't just a story about prejudice or power, it was a story about redemption, resilience, and the profound impact of choosing to rise above.